The college football playoff indicator means little. MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, looking at the game we love, of course, for the hardcore college football fan. That would be you. If you have yet to come across my channel, please dive into the videos, look over the library, and I bet that you will lock it in if you love college football. Again, we bring the best in discussion, debate, and analysis across the board with the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the industry, and analysis from myself as well. All right, we're looking at the college football playoff indicator, and I rarely look at power indexes. Check that. I never look at power indexes, whether they be in any sport, especially in college football, but really in any sport. Actually, they may mean more in college football because of the idiotic, ridiculous system that we have that's subjective. In the other sports, the standings mean everything, and the objective process of determining playoff teams. So power indexes mean absolutely nothing. In college football, they mean virtually nothing. So I don't reference them, but I believe that this one in particular processes straight into what is currently the college football playoff indicator. So the college football playoff indicator then, once they start playing games, becomes the power index. Again, I don't look at any of this stuff, but I found it interesting once I saw this on a headline online, the college football playoff predictor. Then I dove into the numbers and I thought I would love to know what these numbers have been in the preseason in previous seasons, and then see how accurate this college football playoff predictor has been in the past, in a sport that's more predictable than any outside of the NBA. Clemson, Alabama, and then take your shot at Georgia, Ohio State, Oklahoma. That's what we've been able to do basically since 2014 or 15. All right, so the college football playoff predictor is telling us that Clemson has an 83% chance of making the playoffs. Alabama, 71%. I think these numbers speak more to the state of college football than the college football playoff predictor, because I think the predictor is pretty close to what those numbers should be. When you consider that Clemson, their chances of winning the ACC are probably 90-some%. So for them to lose in the ACC, one of two things would have to happen. And I'm not talking about injuries or poor play, just talking about the numbers and probabilities and the scheduling and the losses. Somebody within the division is going to have to jump up, i.e. Florida State, the only team that I could see having any chance of having that kind of capability on the field. Florida State jumps up and they beat Clemson head-to-head. And then, of course, they can play just as well as Clemson, or even a game worse than Clemson, and win the division. And that knocks Clemson out of the ACC championship game, of course. Or if Clemson, let's say, loses a regular season game and then is upset in the ACC championship game. So I believe that most college football fans at first glance would think Clemson, 83% chance of making the playoffs. That's probably low. It almost seems like it's a 100% chance because they'll win the ACC. Clemson not winning the ACC would be as big a shock to me as it would be any team not winning a conference in years and years and years and years and years. There is the biggest disparity of first and second place teams in the ACC than any gap I can remember in college football. Please, down in the comments section, list a time in which there was a conference in which the best team was so much better than the second best team. Maybe USC under Pete Carroll. There might have been some years there where USC was that much better than the second best team in the Pac-12. So Clemson at 83%, again, seems like it should be higher, but understand the probability. So they could win the ACC and still miss out on the playoff if they get upset and there's just a rash of undefeated teams elsewhere. You know, 2 other undefeated teams or 3 other undefeated teams and Notre Dame. Or a couple undefeated teams and then maybe a team that has a better resume than Clemson, even though I believe in the committee's minds they would favor Clemson based on the previous track record and how dominant the team was in winning the national championship last year. That shouldn't come into play. That should have nothing to do with it whatsoever. I don't care what anybody says. I've heard those arguments about giving certain schools and programs the benefit of the doubt because of what they've done in the past. No, that's idiotic. We look at every season and its merits unto itself. And if we can't have, at least now, an objective process, well, we could, if the right people were in power, we could have an objective process. But since we don't, we at least have to judge it based on its own merit now, 2019. So Clemson at 83%, pretty accurate. Alabama, of course, much tougher competition in the SEC at 71%. And that's extremely high when you consider, I think, what's working for Alabama in favor of Alabama or the SEC champion is that it's almost unimaginable to think about the SEC champion missing the playoff. The ACC champion has always made the playoff as well, but it's arguably the worst conference in college football. And if Clemson isn't quite as dominant as we expect, and there are more impressive teams elsewhere, then they would have a higher chance of being left out as a conference champion than the SEC champion. It would be interesting to know right now, when is the first time an SEC champion is going to be left out of the playoff? Is it ever going to happen? Alabama at 71%, and again, a much tougher road than Clemson has in having to get by LSU, Auburn, Texas A&M in the division, and then most likely Georgia or Florida in the SEC championship game. Clemson has a free run through the Atlantic Division. Best team on paper is Florida State. Best team on the field last year was Syracuse in the division. And then, of course, they had a cakewalk in the championship game and probably will this year as well. Okay, now let's get to those were the obvious statistics that seem to make perfect sense. Here are the statistics in the college football playoff predictor that seem to make little sense. I understand that Michigan brings back its coach, Jim Harbaugh, and its quarterback in Shea Patterson. And in this college football playoff predictor, maybe I should have done my homework and looked up the exact criteria. But I think it's pretty simple here. You take last year's team and how good they were. Were they a 10-2 team, 11-2 team, whatever they were? And then what were the personnel losses? Were the personnel losses substantial? And how is that measured in terms of offensive and defensive production? I would think that it goes to that degree. And then also takes into consideration the recruiting ranking and how good the recruiting class coming in is. Now, I doubt if it takes into consideration the recruiting rankings and how elite those players are at the positions in which they may have to supplement the losses to the NFL. I doubt if it goes in depth that far. But it's all about last year's team, what was lost and what was gained. And in particular at the head coaching position and at quarterback. In Michigan's case, obviously they bring back, despite all his critics, one of the best college football coaches in America in Jim Harbaugh. And one of the 10 or 12 best quarterbacks in the nation in Shea Patterson. Chief rival Ohio State, of course, despite the dominance in the division, in Urban Meyer not always winning the division and winning the Big Ten. If you look at it, let's give him 2012 because they had an undefeated team on probation. They basically won the Big Ten championship. They were the best team in the Big Ten. They beat everyone. So he basically won a Big Ten championship in 2012. He went to the Big Ten championship game in 13, won the Big Ten title and the national title in 14, had the best team in 15, but lost. With one loss, still finished in the top 3 in the nation. In 16, they did not win the Big Ten championship, but still went to the playoff. In 17, they won the Big Ten. 18, they won the Big Ten. So basically, Ohio State, even in the years they have not had a Big Ten championship, they've been the best team in the Big Ten since Urban Meyer arrived. So 7 consecutive seasons, excluding maybe 2013, Michigan State would have that claim to be the best team in the Big Ten. It's been Ohio State. So suddenly, because of the absence of Urban Meyer and Dwayne Haskins, supplemented by newcomers in Ryan Day and Justin Fields, it makes sense to a certain extent, unless you look around college football and see where a lot of first-year head coaches have done rather well. And the best example recently is Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma. Stepped right in for Bob Stoops, went to the playoffs. So take all that into consideration. I do believe that the challenge for Ohio State, with a first-year quarterback, with a first-year head coach, and having to play at Michigan, I understand where this may be the opportunity for Michigan. But consider this. Michigan has according to the College Football Playoff Predictor, a 41% chance of making the playoffs, and Ohio State 6%. That is asinine. That is stupid. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. Michigan could certainly beat Ohio State this year head-to-head at Michigan, although it seems as they continue to play every year that this is never going to happen. But, of course, Michigan will beat Ohio State at some point. But they have a 7 times better chance to go to the playoff than Ohio State. And take this into consideration. Ohio State has 3 cupcakes non-conference. Cincinnati, I know Cincinnati's decent out of the group of 5, so I'm not saying Cincinnati's a cupcake, but relatively speaking, they've got 3 group of 5 games, FAU, Miami of Ohio, and Cincinnati. Michigan has to play Notre Dame, who beat them last year, and would have to be judged right now as a comparable team, if not better. So Michigan actually has a tougher road non-conference than Ohio State. So if these percentages were, let's say, considering Harbaugh and Patterson coming back versus Day and Justin Fields, and then Michigan playing the game against Ohio State in Ann Arbor, if Michigan was placed with a college football playoff predictor of 25%, and for Ohio State it was 20%, I would not have an issue with that. But nobody can justify these numbers for me. I don't care what a computer spit out. There is no way that Michigan has a 7 times better chance. This, you know what this means when they put in their formula and it spits out percentages like that. If we could play the college football season in 2019 100 times, if it was physically possible to put the players on the field and have them play 100 seasons, there is no way that Michigan makes the playoffs 41 out of 100 times, and Ohio State only makes the playoffs 6 out of 100 times. That's idiotic. Also take this into consideration that if Michigan makes the college football playoff, they then have a 6% chance of winning the national championship, or they just flat out have a 6% chance of winning the national championship, and Ohio State has a less than 1% chance of winning the national championship. This is crazy. This is crazy. Mississippi State and Tennessee, who won 5 games last year, who won 2 games in the SEC, who play in the same division as Georgia and Florida, Kentucky, and others. Tennessee has a 2% chance of going to the college football playoff. And Mississippi State has a 2% chance, and Ohio State has a 6% chance. Michigan State, who lost to Ohio State again last year, has to go to Columbus this year to play Ohio State. Went 5-4 in the Big Ten last year, and is certainly returning one of the worst offenses in college football. They have a 5% chance of going to the college football playoff, and Ohio State, 6% chance. This just seems insane. Penn State, who is going to be playing a completely inexperienced quarterback, just because James Franklin's back, I guess, and Penn State has to play at Ohio State. They have an 8% chance of making the playoffs, and Ohio State, 6% chance of making the playoffs. Again, new coach in 2017 at Oklahoma in Lincoln Riley made the playoffs. 2018, new quarterback in Kyler Murray made the playoff. And then the dominance of the SEC, and also not just the dominance of the SEC, and I certainly believe that it's the best conference in college football and played the best, there's no doubt, in 2018. But there's also favoritism toward the SEC. I don't think there's any question about that amongst the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, and it shows in the numbers here. that not only does Alabama have a 71% chance of making the playoffs, Georgia is at 40, LSU 32, and Florida 10. And obviously, there's a higher chance of multiple teams making it out of the SEC into the playoff than any other conference by far. My thoughts on the college football playoff predictor. Would love to know what you say about these numbers that seem a bit screwed up to me, but others seem perfectly fine. Most notably, Clemson at 83% and Alabama a 71% pick to make the playoffs preseason. Let's talk it up as we always do, better than anyone else, right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football.